I almost didn't go that day. Honestly, I'd been to London 3 times before and done the whole Buckingham Palace thing, stood at the gates, watched the changing of the guard, taken the same photos everyone takes. The ones where you're grinning like an idiot next to a man in a bearskin hat who looks like he's been carved out of stone. I'd those photos. I didn't need more. But my cousin Sophie, she lives in Pimlico, works for some kind of events consultancy near Westminster. She texted me that morning and said the weather was going to be clear for the first time in a week. That she had a friend who worked in one of the administrative offices near the palace and had mentioned, casually, over coffee, that there might be something worth seeing around the side entrance that morning. Not the main gates. Like the other one. The sovereign's entrance. Sophie is not the kind of person who uses the word might lightly. She's precise. She measures her words. So I think, when she said might, I pulled on my jacket and got on the tube. Basically, it was early October. That particular kind of London morning where the sky looks like someone stretched pale grey silk over the whole city and the light comes through thin and cold and everything feels like it's holding its breath. The leaves in St. James's Park had just started to turn, not the full blaze of it yet, just hints, edges catching amber. A few joggers were cutting across the paths. A couple of pigeons stood on a bench like they owned it. Which, in London, they probably do. Which Sophie was already there when I arrived, standing near the corner of Buckingham Gate, holding 2 coffees from a place on Victoria Street. She handed me one without saying anything because she's known me long enough to know I don't speak properly until I've had caffeine. We stood there for a moment, just breathing steam into the cold air, watching the street. The area around the sovereign's entrance is different from the front of the palace. Most tourists don't know it exists, or if they do, they don't bother with it. The main gates have the iron, the gold, the cameras, the crowds 3 deep on a busy day. But, around the side, the entrance that faces the Royal Mews and the interior of the palace grounds, it's quieter. More official. Less theatrical. There are no gift shops in your eye line. No tour buses idling. Just a stretch of road, a gate with a specific weight to it, and the kind of stillness that tells you this space is used for things that actually matter. There were maybe 8 or 9 people nearby when we arrived. A couple who looked like they might be German tourists, consulting something on a phone. An older man with a professional-looking camera on a proper strap, not a phone, an actual camera with a zoom lens, standing very quietly near a stone pillar like he'd been there a long time and intended to be there longer. A young woman in a camel coat eating a croissant, crumbs falling, unbothered. And a few people who, like me and Sophie, had the look of people who'd been told something without being told exactly what. We waited. That's the thing, I guess, nobody tells you about royal moments. The waiting. Plus, the long, quiet, slightly awkward waiting where you're not entirely sure you're in the right place and you start to feel a bit foolish for being there at all. The German couple had already started drifting back toward the main gates. The woman with the croissant finished it and checked her watch twice. I, in my opinion, was on the verge of suggesting to Sophie that we just go get breakfast somewhere when the energy changed. I don't know how else to describe it. Nothing visible happened. No siren, no announcement. But something shifted, the way air pressure shifts before thunder, and the man with the camera straightened very slightly, and Sophie put her hand on my arm without looking at me. Then, I saw the guards. Not the ceremonial ones. Not the bearskin hats and the rifles held in that particular rigid way that's more sculpture than soldier. These were the ones who don't get photographed as much. Dark uniform, different bearing, the kind of bearing that says this person has assessed every angle of this street in the last 30 seconds and knows exactly what's in it. 2 of them, moving along the pavement with a kind of purposeful quietness, and one position already near the gate itself, which I realized had been there the whole time and I simply hadn't registered in properly until now. Sophie pretty much leaned close to me. "Something's coming through," she said. Very soft. Not a question, like, and, the gate, and, I want to be careful here because it's not like it crashed open or anything dramatic, the gate simply began to move. Slowly. With, complete control, which the kind of movement that has been practiced until it requires no effort at all. And, through it, to be fair, a car. Dark. Like, official looking without being ostentatious. The kind of car that doesn't need to announce itself because its very existence on this particular road, at this particular entrance, says everything. It moved slowly, almost drifting, and came to a stop in a way that felt choreographed, not because it was showy, but because everything happening in this small stretch of London at this moment had a kind of invisible architecture to it that you felt rather than saw. One of the guards, the one nearest the car, moved to the door. Not rushed. Precise. And, then, she stepped out. Plus, I recognized her immediately, which surprised me, because I don't think of myself as particularly attuned to these things. I pretty much don't follow royal news obsessively. I'm not one of those people who has strong feelings about the family one way or another. But, there's something about Carole Middleton that photographs don't fully capture, a kind of composed energy, a sense that she's entirely comfortable in her own skin in a way that very few people actually are. She was dressed in something dark and, well-cut, her hair neat in that way that looks effortless and, definitely isn't, and, she moved from the car to the pavement in one smooth motion like stepping from a boat onto a dock, practiced, unhurried, completely sure of her footing. The guard, was already at her side. Not hovering, not crowding. Just there. Present in the specific way that good security is present, close enough to matter, far enough to be invisible unless you're looking. She said something to him. I, for what it's worth, couldn't hear it, we were too far, and there was the ambient noise of the street. But, he nodded, and something about the exchange felt easy. Not deferential, exactly, kind of, but respectful in both directions. Like two people who understood the shape of the situation they were both in. They began to walk toward the sovereign's entrance. I want to stop here for a second and explain something about the sovereign's entrance, because it matters for what happened next. This isn't a door you walk through casually. It's the entrance used for state occasions, for the state opening of Parliament, for visiting heads of state, for moments that carry a specific weight of ceremony and history. The fact that it was being used at all on a quiet Tuesday morning in October meant something was happening that wasn't on any public calendar. Not necessarily something dramatic. Possibly something entirely routine in the life of the palace. TBH, but not nothing. And, walking through it being escorted through it carried a visual significance that even a completely uninformed bystander could feel. The man with the camera had it raised now. I could hear the soft, rapid clicking of a proper shutter. Sophie had her phone out, though she was holding it low, not obviously filming. I just watched. The guard walked slightly ahead and, to the left of Carole Middleton, that specific position that creates a kind of invisible shield without blocking sightlines. She wasn't looking around. Not in a dismissive way. Plus, more in the way of someone who has learned that looking around creates attention, and that the best way to move through a sensitive space is to move like you belong there, because you do. They reached the entrance. And, then, this is the part that made the man with the camera pause his shutter. The German couple, who had come back, actually go quiet. The guard did something. He stopped, and, just for a moment. Half a second, maybe less. He turned and said something to her again, and, this time I could almost catch the shape of the words, something. That ended in a question, I thought, from the slight rise at the end, and she stopped too, and looked at him, and smiled. Not a public smile, and not the practiced, composed one that goes into photographs. Something smaller. Something that was just between the two of them in that half second before the entrance swallowed them both. Then, they were through. Look, the gate moved again. The car had already gone. The street went back to being just a street. Sophie lowered her phone. The man with the camera slowly brought his down and stood there for a moment looking at the entrance like he was trying to memorize it. Did you get it? I asked him. I don't know why, it just came out. He looked at me sideways. He was maybe 60, with the kind of weathered face that comes from standing outside in all weather for years with a camera. Got the approach, he said. Maybe the entrance. He paused. Plus, not the smile. No, I said. Never do, sort of, he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't disappointment exactly, more like acceptance. Like a man who has spent a long time learning the difference between what can be captured and what can only be witnessed. We stood there a moment longer, the small group of us, strangers on a pavement, sharing something we couldn't quite name. Then, Sophie said, breakfast, and the spell, if that's what it was, lifted. But I kept thinking about it. All through breakfast, on the tube home, for the rest of that day. Not about what I'd seen, exactly. About what I'd felt while watching it. Because, well, there was a moment right as they reached the entrance, right before they went through, where something in the upper windows caught my eye. A movement. A curtain, maybe, or a figure stepping back from the glass. I didn't think much of it at the time. We basically were all focused on the entrance itself. It was only later, going back through Sophie's video, that we both saw it at the same time and looked at each other across the kitchen table. In the window, third floor, to the right, just briefly, a figure. Watching. Standing still, and just watching. And something about the posture, the stillness, the angle of it, the way it stood at the glass without moving and, then, was simply gone. Made Sophie put her coffee down slowly and say, in a voice that was trying very hard to be casual, "Was that, I don't know," I said. But, I think we both did. Sophie rewound the video 4 times. We were at her kitchen table by then, a small, cluttered space in her Pimlico flat, the kind of kitchen that has every inch of counter used for something, cookbooks stacked against the backsplash, a string of dried herbs hanging by the window. A very ordinary room. And we were sitting in it staring at a phone screen trying to make out the shape of something that had lasted maybe 3 seconds in the top corner of a piece of footage that was slightly shaky because Sophie had been holding her phone low. "There," she said, pausing it. Plus, the frame was blurred at the edges. In focus, the gate, the car pulling away, the stone facade of the palace. And, above, in that third-floor window, a vertical shape. Still. The quality wasn't, I guess, good enough to make out features. But the outline was unmistakable. Someone standing at the glass, looking down. Could be anyone, I said. Staff. Plus, security. There are hundreds of people in that building. Could be, Sophie said. She said it in the tone she uses when she means the opposite. I've known Sophie since we were 11 years old. She grew up in a family that takes protocol seriously. Her mother worked for years in the civil service, her uncle spent 30 years in the Foreign Office. She didn't gossip. She didn't speculate. Plus, when Sophie kind of said could be and meant otherwise, she'd thought about it properly first. We both looked at the frame again. The figure's stillness was what got me. Not moving. Not the kind of passing movement of someone walking through a room who happens to glance out. This was someone who had stopped. Deliberately. And was looking down at the entrance. At the woman being escorted through it. I want to be careful about what I'm saying here. I'm not claiming certainty. I'm not claiming I know what was in that window or what it meant. What I'm telling you is what I saw, what I felt. The conversation that followed, because the conversation, in some ways, was more interesting than anything else. Sophie's friend, the one who worked in the administrative offices nearby and had originally mentioned that something might be worth seeing, her name was Philippa, and Sophie texted her while I was refilling my coffee. Just, "Did you know who was coming through this morning?" Philippa replied about basically 20 minutes later. Plus, just 3 words. Not for me to say, and, which in the language of people who work near institutions that run on discretion is not a denial. Sophie put her phone face down on the table. We looked at each other. "The Sovereign's entrance," I said, "on a Tuesday. In my opinion, in October. With no public announcement." Said Sophie. "That basically doesn't happen without a reason." "No," she agreed. "It basically doesn't. Here's what I know about the Sovereign's entrance, and I know this not because I'm an expert. Because I spent 2 hours that afternoon reading everything I could find, the way you do when something is hooked into your brain and won't let go. The Sovereign's entrance, also called the Royal Entrance, is on the south side of Buckingham Palace. It's the entrance used for the state opening of Parliament, for investitures, for formal occasions. It's not the tradesman's entrance, and it's not the staff door. It is, in the architecture and protocol of the building, reserved for moments of significance. The Queen, and I mean the late Queen, because old habits of thought don't die immediately, used it. To be fair, state visitors use it. Members of the royal family use it for specific formal occasions. Carole Middleton is not a member of the royal family. She's the mother of the Princess of Wales. A beloved and, apparently warm figure within the family, by all accounts, but not royal. Not entitled to that entrance by protocol, which means her use of it was a choice. Someone's choice, and someone with the authority to make it. I went back, to that paused frame twice more before I left Sophie's flat. The figure in the window. Here's the thing that kept pulling at me. The posture. I've been thinking about how to describe it, and the best I can do is watchful. Not impatient. Not distracted. Look, the kind of stillness that comes from a person who has been still many times and knows how to do it. A person who has stood in windows before and watched things happen below and understood the particular privacy of being unseen while seeing. I mean, 3 seconds. Maybe 4. And then, gone. Sophie walked me to the door of her building and we said goodbye, and I was halfway to the tube station when she texted me. I think she came to check on her. I stopped on the pavement. Typed back, Carol? Yes, and another pause. Then, or someone arranged it so she could. I stood there a moment, people moving past me on the Victoria Street pavement, a bus pulling away from the stop across the road, London doing what London does, just continuing, indifferent, enormous, old. That would explain the entrance, I typed. It would explain a few things, Sophie sent back. I'm going to tell you something now that I've been circling around since I started writing this down, because I think it's the part that actually matters. Not the protocol. Not the entrance or the guard or even the figure in the window. The thing underneath all of it, which Carole Middleton, in the years since her daughter married into the royal family, has occupied a particular kind of position. Visible enough to be photographed at Wimbledon, at royal christenings, at events that get written about. But not inside the machine, and not part of the formal structure. A mother-in-law navigating a situation that has no real precedent, because the situation her family is in has no real precedent. And doing it, by most observable accounts, with considerable grace. What does it mean when a woman like that's brought through the sovereign's entrance? It means someone wanted to say something without saying it. The to be fair palace has a language. To be fair, it's not spoken. It's expressed through access and placement and entrance and presence. When you're brought through the front gate with the tourists watching, that's one message. When you're brought quietly through the side entrance used for heads of state. Formal occasions, for what it's worth, with a guard at your side and no press announcement, that's a different one. That message is, you matter here. Not for the cameras. Not for the public. Pretty much, for you. I've been to a lot of countries and seen a lot of buildings that carry history in their stone. The way old places hold weight, not just physical weight but accumulated significance. Standing outside Versailles, or near the Vatican, or in front of certain buildings in Istanbul, there's a quality to the air around them that's hard to name but unmistakable once you've felt it. Buckingham Palace has it. Not in a tourist brochure way. Plus, in a real, slightly uncomfortable way. The building has seen things, and not all of them dignified. Not all of them kind, which it has been a place of enormous power and, occasionally enormous loneliness and, the occasional genuine joy and, a great deal of very careful management of appearances. Standing near the sovereign's entrance that morning, watching Carole Middleton walk through with a guard at her side, I felt the weight of that. And then, looking at that paused frame, the still figure in the window, watching, I felt something else. I felt like pretty much, I'd accidentally seen something private. Not scandalous, not secret in any dramatic sense. Just for what it's worth, private, and a small human thing happening inside an enormous institutional thing. The kind of moment that doesn't make headlines because it has sent that kind of moment. It's the kind that happens in the spaces between the headlines, where real life actually occurs. Someone watching a woman she cares about walk through a door. Wanting to see it happen but not wanting to be part of the ceremony of it. Just watching, which quietly. From above. I don't know if that's what it was. I don't know whose face was in that window. I don't know what was said behind those walls that morning or what the visit meant in the larger unspoken conversation of that family. What I know is what the street looked like after it ended. Empty. Ordinary. The leaves still turning in St. James's Park. And the faint sense that I couldn't shake for the rest of the day that something real had happened. Something that wasn't for the cameras or the crowds or the people who write about these things. Something that was just for the people inside his name, I found out later, was something ordinary. Not from any, I think, official source. I want to be clear about that. I didn't dig. I didn't investigate, and it came up in conversation 2 weeks afterward, when I was back in London for a different reason entirely and ended up at a pub in Belgravia with Sophie and a man named Daniel who had, years ago, done a term in the household cavalry before moving into private security consulting. He, wasn't the guard I'd seen. He was just someone who understood that world. I'd been describing the morning to him, the entrance, the car, the escort, the small exchange between the guard and the woman, and he'd listened the way people who've done that kind of work listen, quietly, without interrupting, his eyes on his pint. When I finished, he said, "That kind of escort isn't nothing." "What do you mean?" He turned his glass on the table slowly. "The detail assigned to a visit like that, through that entrance, they don't rotate the junior lads in for it. That's a considered assignment. For what it's worth, someone senior. Someone who's been in the building long enough to know how to handle proximity to complicated situations." "Complicated how?" Sophie asked. Plus, he gave her a look that was almost amused. "Families are complicated," he said. "In any building, which even that one." He paused. "Especially that one. So yeah, I've been thinking about the guard ever since. About what that job requires. Not the ceremonial part, not the standing at the gate in the rain not flinching, though that's real too. The other part, the part where you are physically present for things that have an emotional charge you're not supposed to acknowledge, in spaces where things are happening that will never be reported, next to people who are carrying weights that most people will never understand. You are trained to be invisible while being present. Trained to see everything and respond to nothing that isn't a direct threat. Trained to move through rooms full of unspoken tension without adding to it or relieving it or drawing any attention to the fact that you've noticed it at all. What does that do to a person, over time? Daniel would know, I thought. But I didn't ask. Some questions you can feel the edges of and know not to push through. What I asked instead was, what do you think the exchange was? The thing the guard said at the entrance? He thought about it genuinely. I appreciated that he didn't brush it off. Probably, I guess, something logistical, he said. Plus, room location. Timing, who's meeting her inside, or what route she's taking. He took a drink. But sometimes it's just a word. Something to make the moment feel less formal. Those guards, the good ones, they develop a kind of instinct for it. When someone needs the ceremony walked back a few inches so the human can breathe. I thought of the smile. The small one. Not for cameras. She smiled, I told him. After he said it. He nodded like that confirms something. Good sort of guard, then, he said simply. The part of this I keep returning to, keep turning over in my hands like an odd stone found on a beach, is the question of why the entrance mattered. Protocol is never just protocol, that's something I've come to believe more firmly the older I get. The forms and rituals and physical arrangements that govern formal institutions, they're never merely logistical. They are a language. And, all languages, they can be used to say things that would be impolitic or impossible to say directly. Bringing Carole Middleton through the sovereign's entrance said something. It said, "This family sees you. Honestly, not the public you. Plus, honestly, not the Middleton family as a media narrative or a tabloid interest or a symbol of anything in the larger ongoing story of the monarchy adapting to modernity. The actual you. The woman who raised a daughter, who built a family, who deal with something enormously difficult with what appears, from the outside, to have been considerable love and steadiness. That entrance was, I think, a gesture of acknowledgement. Of the private kind. The kind that doesn't need to be announced because it was never for anyone else. I thought about that figure in the window again while Daniel was talking, the still shape behind the glass, watching the entrance. There's a particular quality to the way powerful people watch things they care about. I've seen it in much smaller contexts, a parent watching their child perform in a school play from the back of the, in my opinion, hall, not wanting to be conspicuous, not wanting their presence to add pressure, just needing to see. A teacher watching a former student they believed in accept an award. Someone who has worked very hard, for a very long time, to be in a specific kind of position and, who then, watches quietly while someone they've extended a kindness to receives it. That's what the posture in the window said to me. Not surveillance. Not calculation. Something quieter. I wanted, well, to see this happen. Daniel was saying something about security rotations. I guess, nodded, but I was still at the window. Still in that paused frame on Sophie's phone. Because here's the thing. If it was who Sophie and I thought it might have been, and I want to say again, clearly, I don't know, I can't know, I'm working. From a blurry 3-second clip and a feeling, but if it was, then what we were looking at was something the public doesn't often get to see. Not the queen consort in a formal portrait. Not Camilla, at a ribbon cutting or a Commonwealth event or a state dinner. Not the public role, the performed role, the role that has been shaped by decades of scrutiny, expectation and the particular burden of being a woman in that family at that time. Just a person. TBH, standing at a window. Watching a woman she apparently likes, or respects, or has decided deserves this gesture. Watching her be brought through a significant door by a man who knows his job. And, I think, allowing herself, for 3 seconds, to simply watch it happen. I've been writing this down because I think it deserves to be written. Not because it's dramatic it has sent. Not because it contains any revelation that will change anyone's view of anything, it probably won't. Because small true things matter. The guard who found the right word at the right moment. The entrance that said something without speaking. The figure who watched from above and, then, stepped back into the room and went on with the day. These are pretty much the moments that the cameras miss. Not because they're hidden, we were standing right there, a handful of strangers on a pavement with coffee cups and camera lenses, but because they don't compress into headlines. They don't have a clean narrative shape. They're just moments, texture, the grain of real life running underneath the polished surface of everything that gets reported and photographed and filed. I think about Carole Middleton walking through that gate. The straightness of her spine, the ease in her step. The way she didn't look around, not because she was incurious, but because she had walked into enough rooms in her life to know that you give yourself fully to where you're going, not where you are. I think actually, about the guard at her side. The half step ahead. The invisible geometry of his position that said, I'm here, you're safe, nothing will touch you. I think about the smile that passed between them and was gone before anyone could quite capture it. And I think about the window. The still shape. The watching. The stepping back. Sophie texted me that night, after Daniel had gone and we'd walked out into the Belgravia street and gone our separate ways. Do you think she does that often? Watches from windows? I sat with that for a while before I replied. Because the honest answer is, I think she probably does. I think there are a great many things that happen in that building, kindnesses, acknowledgements, small deliberate gestures of humanity that no one outside will ever see or know about. I think the figure at the window watches more than the cameras catch. I think the sovereign's entrance carries more meaning on more occasions than the official record reflects. I think basically, that family, like all families, has private moments that would surprise the people who think they know them. I typed back, I think she does. I think that's the part of the job nobody writes about. 3 dots, and then, the watching. Yes, I said. The watching. The last thing I'll say is this. I went back to the spot a few days later, alone. No particular reason. I just wanted to stand there again. The light was different, afternoon instead of morning, gold instead of gray, long October shadows stretching across the stone. I stood near the Sovereign's entrance and looked up at the third-floor windows. Empty. Quiet. Just glass actually, and light, which a tour group went by behind me, a guide saying something about the history of the building. One of the tourists took a photograph of the facade. A pigeon landed on the wall and reconsidered. A car went past without stopping. The gate stayed closed. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just looking. Then, I turned and walked back towards St. James's Park, past the turning leaves, under that pale London sky. And, I thought, some things aren't meant to be captured. Some things are meant to be witnessed, remembered quietly, carried forward. The woman walking through a door that said you matter here. The guard who gave her a moment of ordinary grace in an extraordinary place. And, somewhere above, a figure at a window, still, present, watching, who allowed herself, just for a few seconds, to simply be glad it was happening. That's enough. That's everything, really, and that's the whole story.